Okay, hi. So today we're going to be talking about the books that I read in June. I think that, if you've been watching the channel for a little bit, you know that I'm trying to reduce my physical TBR. I had gotten it down in April to 161, and then I bought books in May and brought it up to, checking, 167, and then, listen. I had to do a lot of adulting in June and a lot more than I normally have to do, and it was stressful. So I went to my local used bookstore and I unhauled a bunch of my books there. I got quite a bit of money back from it, and I bought like 6 books, and I still got $10. So that was exciting. I hadn't seen him in a while, like the guy who owns the place, and he was like, he even said, like, I haven't seen you here in a while, and I felt guilty because I'm like, I love this place, I want to keep you in business. I bought 6 books, and we had a conversation about all the books that I was buying, so, I don't feel guilty about it, but, I started the month off in June with 167 books on my TBR, and then I got it to 169, so we're 8 above my absolute minimum I've been at, and I haven't really been reading a ton, with the whole a lot of adulting thing, so anyway, let's just get into the books that I read. I'm just rambling. The first book I finished in June was The Great Beanie Baby Bubble, Mass Delusion and the Dark Side of Cute. So this was a nonfiction, and it is, I think that a lot of people are probably familiar, at least in the US, and based on what I read in this book, probably the UK, but I don't know if this made it to other parts of the world. But in the 90s and early 2000s, Beanie Babies were like all the rage. They were going for tons of money. People were trying to be completionists and build collections. They thought they were going to retain value. And Beanie Babies were these like plush little toys for kids that became nothing. They weren't for kids in the end. So it kind of walks through like the creator, like the mind behind Beanie Babies. The company that made them was, it's TY, but it's actually called Ty. I always thought it was TY. And Ty is the first name of the creator of the company. That can really speak a lot to how he is personified in this book or discussed in this book. He was just a very conceited person, thought that he knew everything, was very problematic. So we learn a lot about Ty's past, Ty's history, Ty's family, how Ty got into the toy world, and how he developed Beanie Babies specifically, but the author was never actually able to interview Ty himself, so it comes from a lot of other, I'm getting a lot of text right now, it comes from a lot of other sources of people who knew him. So that is part of the book. Another part is like the actual, the company and how the company was running and how the company was organizing things. And then it talks to the effect of like kind of this hysteria over an object, you know, like Bitcoin and stuff like these things that have gotten really hyped and really obsessed over and has caused an inflation in prices that then decline very quickly, and is talking about that kind of phenomenon through the context of this specific explosion of Beanie Babies. I was young when Beanie Babies were like a thing. I think I owned a few. I actually, like, my favorite stuffed animal from when I was a child that I still own it's large, but it's still like Beanie Baby-like, was made by Ty. And while I was reading this, I happened to go to an estate sale where there were a ton of Beanie Babies kind of on display. So a few things just about the book. Like, it's really only if you have any sort of interest in Beanie Babies at all. I wouldn't recommend this widely. It kind of meanders a lot plot-wise. And I think some of the meanderings didn't really need to happen. And then just structurally, there were a few kind of misses for me. Like, it wasn't really told chronologically at times. Just the order of events could at some points be confusing. And again, we kind of went down these like rabbit holes of information that we didn't really need to go down. And then in the same vein of how the Ty himself, Ty Warner, was a bit problematic, the way sometimes people are described in this book is a bit problematic. Like, I don't know, I always find it weird when nonfiction discusses like real people who are alive and who are like not really of any, like, they're not popular figures, and they kind of just like discredit or discount them using a sentence here and there. It's just kind of like not tactful. It's something that I've seen in books a few times and in nonfiction specifically. So just something to keep in mind. But it was enjoyable enough. It took me down a nostalgia memory lane that I was kind of only like on the outskirts of, and was never like fully invested in. Okay, then I read A Children's Bible by Lydia Millet. This is weird. It's a strange book, and it's kind of about this group of teenagers and children who kind of, all of their, I guess premise-wise, all of their parents knew each other in college and now are in completely different walks of life, and they decided to rent this like mansion in the middle of, I don't know, Maine or something, for a summer, or a long period of time during the summer. And all of the children start interacting, and it is just dynamically very strange how the children are described. It's not like it was written for kids, absolutely not, but they're like younger and older than how they seem. There's something very like hazy about the reading experience that I'm finding difficult to articulate. And then things happen, and this I really enjoyed. It was weird, it was atmospheric, it was kind of like, not like you had to suspend your disbelief, but the whole concept of the book was like all these like terrible parents. Like, you know how South Park is like all these parents who have no clue what's going on, and the kids always have to like figure things out. That same idea, not South Park as a vibe, but that idea that these parents are just like kind of useless, and the kids have to be the adults in the situation. And then it really reminded me of, what is that book? Please hold. Leave the World Behind by Rumen Alam. I did not enjoy that book. I thought it was really weird, but it was extremely hyped. And this is like what I wanted Leave the World Behind to be. It was bizarre and just, I don't know. It was just like, if you like weird books, kind of involving children, kind of atmospheric, kind of like, I don't know, it felt kind of drugged and hazy, even though that's like not actually what was happening. I mean, mind you, the parents did a lot of drugs in it, but I don't know. It was just a vibe, and I was there for it. All right, then I have read Mema by Daniel M. Mengara. This was published in 2003. It takes place in Africa. I will pop up where. And it's about this, it's kind of like this man, kind of Mema's mother, and it's like, or what he calls his mother, and it's kind of an ode to his mother. It's really about culture, about changing culture, the effects of colonization in Africa, or this part of Africa specifically, white people coming in and then white people leaving, and like kind of the effects of that, and what was kind of left behind and like the whole of culture that was removed partially from that. And then the clashes of culture, like some people wanting to take on the ways of white culture and others rebuking it and wanting to maintain their identity and the culture that they were born with through the lens of a son kind of recounting the difficulties that his mother faced while still being like a difficult woman herself. Very short. I've been on a kind of journey reading books or fiction that takes place in Africa. I think this was the last book that the Africa Writer series published, and I really enjoyed it. Yeah, it's also a lot about family and the family dynamics of these people and the villages that they grow up in, which through a Western lens is like a lot different. And I just really appreciated the reading experience. I really enjoy when books do this in general, where they leave specific words in the original language. This wasn't a translation, but they leave words that have meaning in that language, and they don't translate them for you, and you just kind of have to pick up on what they are with context clues. Sometimes I think that it's like you kind of have to do a lot more thinking because I can't find these words. Like I couldn't find the translations on the internet, but in this book specifically in Mema, they were very straightforward, and you don't have to do a whole lot of thinking, but I think it just adds like a really nice dynamic to a book. So I would recommend that if you are interested. I thought it was a solid read. Okay, and then I read Rachel by Angelina Grimke. This is a play that was written by a Black author in the 1910s. And Buddy read this with Olivia at Biblioghoul, and I don't think she's been posting any videos lately, but I'll link her channel below in case she decides to. I haven't read a bunch of plays, so I don't have a lot of experience, I guess, reading them, though I have gone to see a lot of plays. But it was really, I think that a really interesting part of this was reading it through a modern lens. It was I think it was the first play that was ever put on in the US with an all-Black cast written by a Black playwright. And it's a bit of not in a day in the life, it's not like a slice of life, but there's the 3 acts, one of them takes place, and then I think you have a time jump of like 4 years later, and then you have a time jump of a week, and you have your kind of protagonist, Rachel, and it all takes place in her family home where she lives with her brother and her mother, and it kind of, you see like this loss of innocence, this loss of purity, you see like the kind of having to come to terms with racial identity and prejudice against people of color, and specifically Black people in this instance. This is also very much about motherhood, the idea of becoming a mother, the idea of bringing Black children into the world that they live in, and it felt, and both of us while reading it kind of thought that Beloved by Toni Morrison what was potentially inspired in part by this, or she had read or seen this play just based on those parallels. Like, as I was reading this, it was really interesting to consider who this was made for at the time and what audiences were going to see it. And yeah, the target audience that was in mind when this came out in the 1910s, where the dynamics in the U.S. were much different than they are now, but at the same time, some things still feel like they haven't changed. But it was pre-civil rights movement and stuff like that. So solid play. Again, I feel like I had a pretty good reading month. If you're interested in plays, if you're interested in this is kind of on my series of books that I was reading that were kind of unknown classics or not as known classics. If you have any interest in reading anything that is from a more marginalized perspective, especially like American classics, I would recommend this, especially if you're looking for plays. I've kind of already tried to branch out and try to find more plays that I could read because it was quite an enjoyable experience. And I have seen that this play has been put on a few times in the US in the past few years. And one of them was more local to where I live, and I was like, dang, I missed it, because I do really enjoy seeing plays in person. But anyway, on to the next book. Okay, then I have read Afterparties by Anthony Veasno. So this is a short story collection. Anthony is like second generation in the United States. His parents were Cambodian immigrants refugees who came over during the Khmer Rouge and during the Cambodian genocide. This book basically, or these short stories, basically all take place in Stockton, California, within like the Cambodian community. They are not connected short stories. There are characters that kind of show up now and then in between the stories, and there's a diverse length of time that takes place. So you see a character born in one or really young, and then you see her in her like 20s or 30s in her position that she has and like kind of interaction she has back. It's a nod back to her family. There were a lot of perspectives that were conveyed, narratives from young perspectives, old perspectives, queer perspectives, straight perspectives. It was quite an enjoyable read. I really love short story collections. I really feel like this one really gave a sense of place and sense of community. And I love that kind of structure and succinctness of concept with a short story collection while not getting too bogged down in it. The author himself, he had sent this out to publishers. It had been accepted. It was in a bidding war. And then before this book published, he passed away in his 20s. And didn't get to see this come to light, but was writing a second book when he passed away. I wish he would have had the opportunity to write more. It was really powerful. And again, I really enjoyed it. I feel like with short stories, you have so little time to get across characters. And he did a really good job of that, making all of the characters feel real, just really giving you like a sense of culture and time and place. And I am always a sucker for a short story collection, I guess, that takes place in California. So add this one to the list. Next one I want to talk about, which took up a lot of my reading for the month, was Pachinko by Min Jin Lee. This is a family saga, and I feel like in my head, I always think I love family sagas, and then there's something about them that I don't appreciate. I thought this was great. This is exactly the type of family saga I want to read. I think that what I have pinned down is that I want a family saga, a long one, to be chronological, and this one is. You start at a period of time, early 1900s, 1920s, and then you move forward. You kind of, it can always be a challenge to do that because there are a number of time jumps. They're not super substantial, but I think that it's very important when you write something like this to pick the time points that you're going to drop back into in the narrative that you're going to convey, because you have to be pushing. You have to keep people caring. You don't want to skip certain events that are important, and you want to keep pushing the narrative along and keep pushing the lives along in a way that feels reasonable and how people would actually develop and change as a people throughout time, given the circumstances that they live in. So you're following, at the beginning, this Korean woman who is living in Korea, and Korea is occupied by Japan at this time, and she meets a man who is also Korean but is from a different class, lives in Japan, seems fairly wealthy, and things kind of ensue from there. And I don't really want to give much away, but you get to see her, you get to see her mother, you get to see her husband, her children, her in-laws, and kind of see her children grow up, see what her children go through, and kind of see them become parents themselves. So you get like 3 full generations of narrative. This was broken up into 3 parts. I was super invested in parts 1 and 2. Part 3 lost me a little bit just in terms of what she chose to do with her characters. I felt that it was still engaging and the plot was still moving forward. But I didn't like some of the decisions that she made, but some of the decisions really were gut-wrenching for me. Like I was sitting in bed listening to the audiobook with my partner, and I legitimately gasped when something happened and like stopped what I was doing, just had my hands like this and was like listening to this scene play out. The narrative structure is very straightforward. The writing is really easy to get along with. So don't let the size of the book deter you. Also, this is a look into a time and a culture that I wasn't really familiar with. Japanese occupation and colonization of Korea. Korean folks living in Japan because of that, and how they were discriminated against, the racism against them, their rights as citizens, or lack thereof, and kind of the fallout of that with World War II and Japan's involvement and kind of what happened to Japan after that, and America's somewhat occupation there, participation there, because, America likes to be involved. It was really interesting coming off of reading this right after reading some books that were written in the same time era in the 30s, 40s, and 50s but from Japanese Americans in America, and kind of the things that they went through here, right? I just read No No Boy, and which talks about the Japanese internment and just like how the racism that Japanese Americans faced in America. It was really interesting reading that, and then coming into this book where it takes place in the same time, and the kind of treatment of Korean folks in Japan and in Korea themselves when they were, colonized by Japan, and just the position of power and how that can change the landscape of identity and treatment. And it was just kind of at a more meta level. It was interesting reading those so quickly next to each other. But that was more about me than about what you would be interested in terms of the book. But it was a really, I feel like I'm on repeat right now, but I guess I had a good reading month. I just thought it was a really good book. Despite some of the flaws, I was super invested in the characters, which is always very important in a long novel like this. So if you haven't read it yet, I would really recommend. I thought it was fantastic. And those are all the ones that I read in June. That is all I have. Let me know if you read any of these books. Recommend me books based on what I liked and disliked. And tell me what you've been reading, and I will talk to you in the next one.